Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jordan and I am from Folia Health, and we're so happy to have you here today. First, I wanted to give you some background on Folia. So, we're a free app where you can track everything that you want for IgAN and other chronic conditions. This includes symptoms, treatments, your diet, exercise, stress levels, daily activities, and more. And just a little background story. Folia was inspired by our founder's Nell's mom, who diligently tracked her brother's rare condition, CVID. She realized as she went on to study public health that the data researchers and clinicians needed to understand how the treatments work for different groups of patients really did exist. It just wasn't readily available to them. And so from there, Nell went on to build Folia, and we're now 8 years old. We're based out of Boston, and our goal is to provide a free tool so that patients can turn their journals, your notes docs, all of those other medical documentations and things that you have into organized data where you can get insights about your health based on what you've tracked. As well as if you choose to, you can share your data anonymously for research and earn gift cards for doing so. So with Folia, you can track things like how your diet affects your symptoms, which actually leads us to our main event today, the IgAN diet. And we're thrilled to have Lauren Levy with us. She's a certified specialist in renal nutrition who's worked with patients with IgAN and CKD since 2010. So for those of you who did submit your questions ahead of time, thank you so much. And anyone that's here, you can add in additional questions as they come up today through the Q&A tool, which you should see on your screen. If you don't find that, you can also throw them in the comments or like in the little chat box, and we'll see them that way as well. I know some of you had some questions about like specific diets or like specific recipes and different things like meal preps, things like that. We have limited time today, so we're going to go over kind of like the IgAN diet as a whole, and then we're going to have some follow-up events next month for Kidney Month with Lauren, where we will cover tons of meal ideas. So stay tuned for that. And now I will pass it over to Lauren.
Thank you, Jordan. I will take over from here. I really appreciate Jordan and Folia for having me today. This is something that I love speaking about is kidney health and specifically IgA nephropathy. So if you are someone who has IgA nephropathy and have received very little to no information around diet, you're not alone. But hopefully today through this workshop, we'll give you some ideas and tools about where you can look within yourself and your season of life about what you can do to be your most healthy self. As Jordan mentioned, my name is Lauren Bud Levy. I am the owner of Happy Health Nutrition. It is a CKD insurance-based private practice where we focus really on holistic health to help treat your kidney-related issues. I'm also the director at Culinary Nutrition for Kidneys, Inc. That has it's a website that has recipes that are plant-based and kidney-friendly, as well as I'm on the Scientific and Medical Advisory Board for the IgA Nephropathy Foundation. And prior to doing all of this, I did work in dialysis for 10 years. So, regardless of what stage of kidney health or disease that you are facing, I absolutely can help you with that answer for sure. So today, as Jordan said, we're really kind of trying to get into what are the important parts of the IgA diet, and not necessarily meal plan specific, but that doesn't mean we're not going to talk a lot about food. We absolutely are. And I'm excited for March for us to continue to delve into that food piece. I find with my IgAN patients that many times it's best to start with the background and traditional medical management that you might be facing as a way to understand your why. Why am I having to take these medicines? Why is my body acting this way? What are my doctor's goals for my health? And then we can use that why to evaluate what is our own personal why on our potential to evaluate and determine our nutrition interventions that we do for ourselves every time we eat something or drink something throughout the day. This is a workshop type of activity webinar, I will lecture for a little bit, but definitely drop any of your questions into the chat because I really would like it to be interactive at the end. And for those of you who did submit, as Jordan mentioned, I tried to make sure that I built in those answers for you. So make sure that if you're watching this on replay, that you look for your personal questions built into the presentation. All right, so IgA nephropathy is an autoimmune disease that affects the kidneys. And that's really important. It's autoimmune. It's not a kidney disease that is autoimmune. It's an autoimmune disease that affects the kidneys. And the reason why I make that very distinct separation is because many times um, things we read online and information we're given is really related to people who have CKD for different reasons. And the most common reasons for kidney disease are long-term uncontrolled blood sugar and blood pressure. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you on the other side of this webinar identify with that. And your root issues for any type of kidney issue is different than the general, person that falls into that CKD bucket. IgA nephropathy is technically the most common glomerulonephritis worldwide. However, it is estimated that 60,000 people in the United States have IgAN. It's also estimated that 37 million people have CKD. So, yes, most common glomerulonephritis, but such a small proportion that your nephrologist may only see a few people in their practice that have IgA nephropathy. So, it is understandable that many times people don't necessarily get a full picture and understanding of what is always best for me, that question, as well as the demographics of someone with IgA nephropathy tends to be a higher proportion of Asian and Caucasian descent, as well as much younger. So people active and healthy. And so we want to really look at what season of life are we? What possibilities do I have? Do I even cook? Maybe, you're a caregiver on this webinar today trying to get answers for your child or your daughter or your spouse. And so we really want to look and understand at what is the true answer of our why, our root cause. Your goal for your doctor is to relieve symptoms, especially in times of flares, reduce any type of edema and blood pressure issues. They want to delay further kidney damage. And oftentimes, those medications that they use are going to help to control blood pressure. A diuretic, which is another word for many people call water pills to get the fluid off and the swelling down, as well as to minimize any protein loss in your urine and to help control blood pressure. Those are the main traditional focuses of your physician related to IgAN. However, where IgAN starts is actually in our lungs or in our GI tract. So the issue with an immune condition is our immune system gets revved up and on overdrive. And whatever starts that initial process, then we have an accumulation of those IgA immunoglobulins, your immune system, and they then build and accumulate. And when they do form those complexes, they can either leak in from the gut or respiratory system into your blood, and then they go to the kidney. And this very interesting picture is the inside functional unit called a nephron of your kidney. And where that arrow is, that's where those IgA complexes, they get clogged up in there and they can cause scarring. So if you're someone who has had a kidney biopsy in order to determine if you have IgA nephropathy, and they talked about whether there's scarring or not, this is where the doctor is looking to identify that. And if you do have a lot of scarring, Oftentimes, it leads to decreased filtering, blood and protein in the urine, or swelling in hands and feet. So regardless of scarring or not, these are those symptoms, and we want to try and use the foods that we eat and things that we drink as a way to be as anti-inflammatory, keep our immune system as calm as possible to prevent any type of flares that we can prevent. And don't worry, I'm not going to describe this slide, but the reason why I have it here is that this is a great time through research and development that there are more and more medications coming out for people with IgA nephropathy. And it is good, it's a good thing and a good time for that because traditionally, most of those medications were really just very band-aids trying to relieve symptoms and not necessarily hit that root cause. So it's good to know you should, as someone that technically has a rare condition, you should always be your own proactive participant in your care. And I think this aligns really well with Folia and collecting your and keeping your data and knowing what is coming out, what applies to me, because there are new medications that are hitting the market related to IgAN. But I'm not here to talk about medicine and medications. I'm here to talk about nutrition, and how to set you up for success. Many times when I get someone new as a patient with IgAN, I see they have protein in their urine. They may or may not have kidney damage or any type of impacts to their kidney function. But sometimes they do. And so we want to hit that proteinuria. We want to understand what is my risk? What is my stage of kidney disease? Do I have to worry about any type of electrolyte imbalances that you might read online, like potassium and phosphorus and sodium and protein? And does it matter and how much? And that gets so overwhelming. And then we really look at what does the research say, and how do I, apply this that I don't feel like my full-time job is my health and ultimately promote longevity and stress management. So meaning you have a long life, healthy life to live ahead of you. You CKD or IgAN should not be the reason why that you feel that you're being hindered in any way. And so we really want to just use the foods that we eat as a way to sustain and fulfill us and not necessarily to tear us down. So we're going to kind of talk about this. The first thing that most people get told is you need to be on a low salt diet or a low sodium diet. Sodium is a mineral that is used in our body for nerve function and muscle contraction and fluid balance. So sodium actually helps keep our fluids balanced, prevent, and we think about edema many times with IgAN, but it also helps to keep our blood pressure in check. So too much sodium can increase our blood pressure. We want to keep our sodium intake or salt intake, sodium, less than 2,300 milligrams per day. Many times you may have been told by your doctor or somebody else for a lower amount that 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams is a nice sweet spot. Most research shows that when you try and hit 1,500, it's a little too hard. And this is the National Kidney Foundation number, but it's totally fine and healthy and safe if you want to be in that 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams. So where do we get sodium in our diet? We get it from salt, sodium chloride. We get it from packaged goods like bread and deli meats, dressings and sauces, fast food. Frozen meat is often enhanced with sodium phosphate, which adds salt to it. And many times in canned products, especially things like soup and ramen and canned vegetables and beans and things like that. And so I highly encourage you, after I'm going to give you some tidbits around sodium in the next following slides, to after this go hunt through your pantry, your refrigerator, and look to see where is salt hiding in your house. So here you can see that sodium is actually the highest percentage of sodium that we get in our food intake is from processed and restaurant foods. So oftentimes when I ask people, do you use salt in your cooking? Do you use salt at your table? They say, oh, no, no, I'm following a low sodium diet. I don't use salt at the table. I don't salt my water to make pasta. But actually, that is a much smaller proportion than the sodium we get at a restaurant or the sodium we get in packaged goods. And so, as self-advocates for our health, reading food labels is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. And why we want to follow that low sodium diet is to help reduce swelling, to control blood pressure, as well as potentially to reduce the protein loss in our urine and to make any diuretics that you might be taking much more effective. We don't want what we're eating to be fighting our medicine. We want them to be working together ultimately. So let's talk about ways to reduce sodium when we cook at home. I already mentioned reading food labels. When you read a food label and you're looking specifically for sodium, the sodium is right there on the food label itself. It will give you the amount of milligrams as well as the percent daily value. I already told you we should have less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. If you eat 3 meals a day and no snacks, you can simply divide that in three, and you could have about 700 milligrams of sodium in one meal, which makes it sound crazy high. However, um, the reality is that foods can add up very quickly in sodium or salt, and we need to actually know what we have, not just assume. So that's why I want to read the food labels. Choosing fresh foods are lower in sodium. Look for no added salt canned products. Even though I had mentioned canned products are generally high in sodium, if you look for no salt added or and read that food label, there are many opportunities that you can find a low sodium canned product. I will say canned soups are really hard to find a low sodium product. But things like canned beans, canned vegetables, if you choose so, can be a nice convenient source, especially the canned beans, canned lentils that you can get no added salt that are high in fiber and high in protein, and you don't have to worry about it. Rinsing canned foods can also reduce the sodium. Not adding salt in things like cooking water, or even if you're reading a recipe and it calls for salt, just reduce it in half or leave it out. And then if you need to, if you find that that recipe you had is now bland and tasteless, you can always put a little bit of salt on your in your hand and do a little bit on the top, which would probably be less than if you used all that salt from the recipe. And you want to use spices and spice blends that do not contain salt. Many people do not realize that things like steak seasoning, taco seasoning, um, the first ingredient in those things is salt. But there are lots of convenient and inexpensive options that just don't have salt in them. You can use any spice that does not have salt added. Lemon pepper is another one that has hidden salt that you wouldn't think would necessarily have salt in it. Um, so look for the salt-free versions. There are salt-free versions of taco seasoning and of steak seasoning. There are brands that focus on being low sodium. You can choose those if you'd like. And you can always conveniently find no salt added spices. And you want to limit your instant foods with sauces or added salt. And what that means is mostly like frozen foods. So sometimes when you go into that freezer section and you want to choose a very quick, steam in the bag or heat up vegetable, nowadays you can find those vegetables, but they might have like a light lemony butter sauce with it. That's where you're going to find the salt added to that product. If you use the plain broccoli in this example, frozen foods are a great option that are naturally low in salt. Typically, frozen foods are low in salt as long as they don't have those sauces. So they can be an easy, quick way, convenient way, cheap, inexpensive way to get fresh food that is also low in salt. When we eat out, Um, it can be, it can just be so hard sometimes. You want to go socialize. We eat out to socialize for convenience, to celebrate, right? The last thing that you want to be doing when you're eating out is stressing about, how much salt is in the food. But the reality is, anytime you DoorDash, you are getting more sodium than you probably need in the day. So in general, choosing restaurants where food is made to order, where you can ask for it to be prepared without salt, is definitely more helpful than those restaurants that are already pre put together foods. Um, in fast food, you can ask for things like no salt on French fries. They are still French fries though. Um, but in a restaurant, you can ask for no salt added to things like salad. Surprisingly, they add salt to salad, um, and other things. You can review the menu ahead of time, which I think, regardless of IgAN or not, can be super helpful because I think we've all been there where we panic order and don't choose the food that we actually really wanted. So review the menu ahead of time before you go, make your choice, and then when you're there, enjoy yourself and choose that food that you were planning on doing. Asking for sauces and dressings on the side can make a very big impact in sodium and sometimes in potassium if you have issues with potassium as well. By getting pasta dry and asking for the sauce on the side, or getting salad dry with dressing on the side, all you simply need to do is add back what you actually want to eat. It's going to be a lot less than what the restaurant would serve you and will make it a healthier choice than had you just ordered it as is. And when eating out, if bread is on the table, leave it alone. Bread can be a very high salt source. Sandwiches um, in the US are one of the leading sources of sodium, even if you make them at home. And so you want to be aware. Bread has a lot of salt, and then we had already mentioned deli meat has a lot of salt. There are some heart healthy options that you can look into and that are much lower in sodium, but many common brands have as much as 500 milligrams of sodium in one slice of deli turkey. That is a huge amount. If you were to make that at home and use 3 slices of turkey on your sandwich, that is 1,500 milligrams of sodium before you even add any mustard or any bread to that turkey. So you want to be aware because especially when we eat out, 3 slices is not what we're getting. We're getting a lot more. And then consider sharing your entree or bringing home half. Choosing plain steamed veggies on the side or side of fruit is always a good choice because it tends to be lower in sodium that way. And asking for oil and vinegar and using that as a salad dressing can go a long way into having a lower sodium meal. You don't need to do all of these things every single time. You can pick one or two of them so that you still enjoy yourself. And it's definitely going to be a better choice than had you not thought of doing any of it. I've already mentioned a couple times protein in the urine. So protein becomes a very big discussion with IgAN patients. And it's important to know that whether it's protein or the rest of these slides we're going to be talking about, there is very limited research done in IgAN patients specifically. There are only 60,000 people in the United States. So many times people with IgAN are not isolated from being a part of another research study. And so clinical application really comes down to looking at general CKD risk, as well as putting together some of these smaller studies that are available for IgA nephropathy. Many times those are animal based and or they're epidemiology based. So they're not a perfect one-to-one description or application, but we take the learnings and the shortcomings from them and decide, okay, what is good for me and what's my risk factor there. So when it comes to protein, there was an animal study that showed that there was higher IgA complex, that part of the immune system that can scar up the and jam up the kidneys in animals that were on a high protein diet, as well as there's a human study that showed that when you were diagnosed with IgAN, if you had a lower protein intake, it resulted in less work on the kidneys. So as a dietitian, I look at protein intake related to the stage of kidney disease that you are in. And you should do that as well. Protein is part of our muscle. It helps to make enzymes and bone and skin and hair and hemoglobin. It does some really vital functions for our body. It is important to include. You do not want to have a no protein diet, especially in recent years as a plant-based diet has become more popular and has gained more notoriety. There has become a discussion of plant versus animal. We can absolutely get all the protein we need in the day through plant sources. The idea that plant sources do not provide us the right amino acids or protein content is not true. And we get protein from many different plant sources. And so you can see on this other side of the slide examples of animal protein sources and plant protein sources. So let's talk about this plant versus animal discussion. And we did get some questions about this. Ultimately, what they see in all CKD is that when we eat animal protein, even in healthy individuals, it makes our kidneys work harder. And over long term, especially if you have any type of kidney issues, we don't want to make our kidneys work harder. We want to feed ourselves in the right proportion so our kidneys don't have to work that hard. As well as you may need to be on a moderate or restricted protein intake, and plant proteins generally have lower protein per weight than animal proteins, meaning a deck size of carbs, both in height and width of animal protein, chicken, fish, beef, is about 20 to 25 grams of protein, and versus plant proteins, a half cup of beans is about 8 grams of protein. So it's still a good protein source, but you can fit more in on those plant sides and keep you fuller than you can with animal protein. Many research studies show that if you can replace at least 50% of your animal protein with plant protein, it is kidney protective and protects against the risk for progression of kidney disease as well. Animal protein contains cholesterol and saturated fat. And we saw in earlier slides when we went back to our why of IgAN, many times people with IgAN do have high cholesterol. And so if we're following a high protein diet or inclusive of a lot of animal products, we're going to get cholesterol there. Whereas plant protein sources do not have cholesterol in them. And in fact, they're oftentimes high in fiber. And one of the benefits of fiber is it helps to clean out our GI tract and grab cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and prevent it from coming into our system. And so if you're eating a diet that's much more animal focused, you're not getting necessarily always enough fiber and you're getting more cholesterol, which is not good for your general health. And we are more than just our kidneys. We are our heart, we are our lungs, we are our gut, we are our, everything. So we want to make sure that our diet is also inclusive of our total health. Animal sources, when eaten and broken down, they produce a lot of acid in our blood. One of the functions of our kidneys is to keep our blood in a good acid-base balance. And so if we're having a diet that has a fair amount of animal protein, and especially if it is deficient or not as much fruits and vegetables, and 90% of US people do not get enough fruits and vegetables, then you're leading towards a higher acid load that your kidney now has to produce base to keep it in a good level. And by keeping that acid in a nice level, it allows for our blood proteins like hemoglobin to work really well. And so again, we just want our kidneys to not have to work as hard. We want to feed ourselves that allows us to do the work in the cooking and the eating, and our kidneys to just filter what it needs. Animal protein has been touted for a source of omegas, which are the healthy fat, omega-3s. Things like tuna and salmon and sardines are really great sources of omega-3s. And maybe that's something that you might want to include in your diet. Plant proteins like walnuts and chia seeds do have omega-3s. You absolutely can get omega-3s, but typically we think much more of the omega-3s in the animal sources. And so that is one thing that you want to consider when you choose the why or the what, not the why, the what of animal protein. So we want to look at how much should I have. If you have stage 1 or 2 kidney disease, which is a GFR of 60 or greater, we are all born technically in stage 1. We want a moderate intake of 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram body weight. We generally work on pounds. So to convert that to pounds, you take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2 to get kilograms. Or you type into Google, I weigh 170 pounds. How much is that in kilograms? And you can get that answer too. And that is for just a healthy individual. That is the same amount as any healthy individual is recommended, 0.8 to 1. For stages 3 through 5, if you're nutritionally stable, about 0.6 grams is appropriate. And if you're someone that may be at risk for nutritional risk, either older and might be at risk for malnutrition, or if you have diabetes, you want to probably be closer to the 0.6 to 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. And this is where working with a dietitian to help you understand can be very helpful. If you're on dialysis, then dialysis is doing the filtering for you. And so we go from trying to preserve our kidney function for as long as we can to, okay, now dialysis is doing that for us, so we can increase our protein intake to 1 to 1.2 kilograms. And if you've had a transplant, because a lot of my IgAN patients, they stay active in their care way past transplant. And when you do have a transplant, oftentimes you get told, well, great, you're good. But you want to go back to that healthy individual amount of protein intake, which is 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram body weight. And it's really important to know that the standard American diet is already way above all of these numbers at 1.3 grams per kilogram body weight, which is ultimately why people feel like when they transition to a kidney-friendly diet, that they are on a huge protein restriction. The protein restriction is not actually very much compared to what we're supposed to get. We just are very protein dominant in this country. So this slide shows, and if you're watching this on recording, you might want to stop and kind of take it in for a second. This this slide shows how many grams of protein that we get from different sources, both plant and animal. And if you are not familiar with my fish example here, um, 3 ounces. That's a checkbook. I know that's kind of dated. An iPhone is a good alternate example for the size of something thin like a flounder type of fish. But you can see the animal sources in the checkbook and the deck of cards are much higher than the plant sources. Um, but those plant sources often come with fiber. The unfortunate reality is that our typical portion sizes of animal products don't align with how much we need. And so when I say that deck of cards is not the equivalent of a skinless, boneless chicken breast you might get at the grocery store. So you can see in this slide that the grocery store portions um, are much higher. Most chicken breasts, instead of being 3 ounces, they're 6 to 8 grams or 6 to 8 ounces. So they're almost twice, they're about twice the size of what we need. Salmon is um, typically served at 5 to 7 ounces, although many times you can get thinner cuts of salmon. And when we consume protein drinks, they can be all over the place, right? Sometimes you can easily find a protein supplement or shake that is fairly low in calories but has 40 grams of protein. And so you want to look through things like that when you're evaluating, am I getting too much protein or am I getting enough protein in my daily intake? And then our good old hamburger can be anywhere from 21 to 37 grams of protein. And if you're eating a hamburger, not in your house and outside, and you can check those menus online. This is a great place to do that because you can see how much those things are. A lot of my IgAN patients ask me specifically about protein and physical activity, and I think we may have had a question about this because generally you are active, you're going to the gym, you're playing sports, you're doing all the things and having a great time doing it. You should absolutely stay physically active. When we think then about the protein part, protein is individualized. If you are still growing, you are not somebody who should be necessarily restricting protein. And so getting that personalized information from your physician or dietitian is extremely important. If you're done growing and you're physically active, make sure that you have a good breakfast. I find that a lot of people end up really hungry and in a bad space because their breakfast is so light that they're not, that then they feel really deficient as they go through their day. Have a meal after your workout. So when we think about how our muscles in recovery stage after workout, they crave protein and electrolytes, plan around that. Just know that if you work out before lunch, have a good solid lunch after. Have a dinner after, depending on that timing. Use whole foods as protein sources. You don't have to be stuck on protein supplements. You can use 2 tablespoons of peanut butter and a half an apple. That's 8 grams of protein. You can use hummus. You can use lots of different things that get you uh, protein after a workout that doesn't require you to have supplements. And if you are going to have a supplement, that's fine. But generally, avoiding protein supplements that are more than 20 grams of protein is a good idea just because it's hard to get enough calories in the day if you're having something higher. And any type of, I put this slide in here because reaching a healthy weight is important. And if you saw in the headlines in the last week or two, GLP-1s that are, the Mounjaros, Ozempics, those type of medications, GLP-1s are starting to become used more often and especially in CKD. And so this might be something, a discussion you end up having with your doctor. And and reducing proteinuria can happen with weight loss. We do sometimes see improved renal function as well as metabolic and cardiovascular indicators. I will say you can absolutely reach a healthy weight without any medication, and doing it through whole foods for sure. Now we go into our section here about some of these more researched things that you might find on the internet. Is fish oil good for me? What about gut health? And ultimately, we want to remember that our research studies are limited and in small numbers. Fish oil has been looked at in for many years related to IgAN. The dosage of fish oil is always varied. The length of follow-up has varied. The idea is that fish oil is very anti-inflammatory and it's very heart healthy. Um, some studies have seen a slowed renal function decline, an improved protein in their urine, and even potentially vascular function. These foods on the one side, those are chia seeds, sardines, tuna, um, walnuts, and salmon. Those are all great sources of omega-3s, which is ultimately what the fish oil is getting at. And so this might be something that you want to be able to include, and you should include in your eating pattern. You can get them from plant sources, you can get them from animal sources. But ultimately, many of those dosages, you should ask your doctor if that's something you're interested in, because it is much higher than the general amount, and you should not take a fish oil in such a high dose without a physician okaying that or approving that. And gut health is a huge aspect in all forms of kidney health, but it is really important in IgAN. So people with IgAN, they have, it's called higher intestinal permeability generally. It means that that's how those IgAN complexes are getting into your blood system. And so people also with IgAN have a higher incidence of celiac disease as well as irritable bowel. And so trying to heal your gut is an important part. Diet quality and healing your gut is more important than whether you eat gluten or not, or you're vegan or not. That diet quality is going to help your whole body. There have been seen that people may have sensitivities to gluten, egg, and milk. Animal studies related to gluten specifically have seen less IgA complex formation, but no outcome in progression. And lots of research keeps going on about the gut microbiome. What I would say is I haven't seen a study that pairs up gluten-free and the kidney friendly aspects of diet. And so there's really a lot of potential. And we don't need gluten necessarily in our diet per se, but what we really want to look at is our general gut health. So identify your own symptoms. Think, do you have a bowel movement every day? You should have a bowel movement every day. Do you tolerate all foods, or do you have foods that cause bloating or are uncomfortable for you? Does celiac run in your family, or have you been tested for celiac? There are a couple case study results that showed that IgAN was in remission because it was really an undiagnosed celiac um, diagnosis. And think about how many fruits, veggies, beans, nuts, legumes, etc. are you actually eating? Taking a pill does not fix our diet quality, and we need all of these things to help feed the good bacteria in our gut to create good gut health. So you want to reach for at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. You want to get at least 25 grams of fiber if you're a woman and 38 grams of fiber for men. Limiting alcohol and foods with a lot of preservatives can be helpful because those types of things, um, they do bad for our good gut bacteria. And that's where eating whole foods and limiting alcohol can be helpful. You may want to choose fermented foods like yogurt or tempeh or kimchi. Um, Getting a variety of colors on your plate is super important because that's where we get a variety of nutrients and those pro and prebiotics, especially those prebiotics that feed the good bacteria. They're all contained in different colors and variety and taste. That's the best thing that we can do without having to worry too much about the specific numbers of our health. And the other part that I want to really highlight here towards the end of our presentation is electrolyte balance. I get a lot of questions from IgAN patients that may have really good kidney function, but just a lot of protein in their urine. And is potassium important? Is phosphorus important? The answer is yes. However, it might not apply to you in that season of life. And so you want to understand if it does before you start to out and out limit it. When it comes to potassium, understand what is high potentially, only limit if it is actually high, and eat a variety of foods. Many times people that end up with high potassium related to food intake, they might have the same smoothie every day that has a lot of high potassium foods in it. It's not that they need to overtly restrict potassium, they just need to make a little bit of changes. Preventing constipation not only is good for your gut health, but it does help to control potassium. And eating a balanced plate, meat is actually very high in potassium generally. And if we get our meat portions closer into how much protein we need in a day, we can actually usually impact our potassium. With phosphorus, the same thing. You only want to limit if it's high. There is no daily limit or amount, so don't waste your time reading food labels for phosphorus in the numbers part. But instead, you want to read ingredient lists to find the letters PHOS. Those are phosphorus additives that can impact your blood phosphorus level. And they're on lots of different food items and drinks. It doesn't mean you can't have that food item. You just need to choose a different brand that does not contain that additive. And ultimately, if you choose whole food versions, you're generally going to avoid those preservatives and that added phosphorus to begin with. So ultimately, what all this discussion was leading towards is following a balanced plate. Try and get 50% of your plate from fruits and vegetables, 25% protein, 25% whole grains. There are lots of options that are gluten-free, like quinoa and brown rice, and there's also gluten-free pastas if gluten-free is something that you are interested in. Use oil sparingly, but healthy fat, especially in the form of whole foods like nuts and seeds and smaller amounts of avocado if you have a problem with potassium, or avocado in general are good choices. And drink plenty of water. Underhydration can really impact a lot of things in our health. And you have a whole lifetime to live. There are going to be certain times in your life and seasons in your life that you can take on more of this than others. Building a generalized healthy foundation is extremely important, and understanding and forgiving yourself in those times that it's out of your control, still enjoying going out and celebrations and all those things that are important in our lives is important for our stress and mental health, which also impacts our total health. And don't forget to just generally be healthy, enjoy family and friends, eat a variety of foods, and we can only do so much for. So IgAN is a potentially progressive form of kidney disease that generally affects younger people. Although nutrition research is generally limited, we want to practice healthy lifestyle and think longevity and whole health instead of, oh my goodness, I have this disease. If you are looking to get in touch with me, this is my contact information here. Always happy to help. Thank you so much to Folia for having me today. And at this point, we can open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. And I loved that reminder about also just knowing what's in your control at the time, like the season of life that you're in, because I feel like for myself, stress is always like, oh my gosh, can I not eat this? And it has an adverse effect. So thank you for reminding us of that. We did get some questions through, so I'm just going to kind of run through the list because I know we only have about 10 minutes here. But the first one, it says, what's important to focus on given the differences in dietary recommendations between US recommendations for diet compared to KDIGO ones?
Okay, between the Kadoki ones. You want to look at your stage of kidney disease and then how it applies to the Kadoki ones. Those are the National Kidney Foundation ones. The National Kidney Foundation standards will align with the US standards whenever possible.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. And then this is a good like kind of additional one for the plate, the kind of perfect plate that you had there. Is vinegar a better alternative or substitute to salt? And how much vinegar is allowed?
Yeah, I love vinegar. So whoever wrote that question, I love this question. Vinegar is a great option to spice up any plate. And there really isn't too much of an adverse or upper limit per se. Sometimes I believe I had read someplace 10 tablespoons in a day or something might be too much. I mean, if you're trying to drink vinegar, it is not pleasant. But the amount that you're going to add on a food, it will be just fine.
That's true. I think I'm one of the weird ones who I actually do like I love pickle juice and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And some people put a little bit of vinegar in water, and 1 to 2 tablespoons is fine. Um, there's a whole thing around that. That's not going to be harmful, but I wouldn't drink a just straight up champagne vinegar or balsamic vinegar.
Is there harm? Is there harm having a plant pro? Oh, sorry. Is there harm having a plant-based but also low protein diet as recommended by a nephrologist, zero point 0.6 grams per kilogram a day?
Um, Generally, if your GFR is less than 60, so if you have less than 60% function and you're not on dialysis, that's probably a very appropriate amount.
Okay, perfect. And then does IgAN support Greek yogurt? Or maybe like is Greek yogurt part of the IgAN diet? Might be.
Yeah. So if you don't have any issues with dairy, Greek yogurt can be an option for you. It is a fermented food, which is great for probiotics. You do want to take into consideration Greek yogurt tends to be really high in protein. So if you have Greek yogurt, I always recommend eat it as a meal, as part of a meal, and not a snack. So I think like, breakfast or something. The other thing is Greek yogurt many times can have a lot of added sugar in it. So just read your label, make sure you're not getting a lot of extra sugar. You don't necessarily have to go zero fat, but watch for the sugar.
Okay, good to know. And then any suggestions for an Indian-based diet where we generally eat a lot of, or we generally eat rice every day?
Yeah. Rice every day is totally fine. And a lot of, Indian-based diets also incorporate great sources of plant proteins. So it can be very kidney friendly naturally.
Gotcha. Okay, that's awesome. Um, I can get this one. Do you have top five veggies or fruits that could be incorporated into a diet?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to tell you almost all vegetables and fruits can be incorporated into a diet, with the exception of star fruit. Um, but I love berries because berries are versatile, generally lower in sugar, and can be added to a lot of things. Um, I am a big fan of here in the Northeast. Arugula is like a common green that people eat, and it is very low potassium. And so for my patients who have to worry about potassium, it's a great option there. As well as radishes tend to be something people don't think about. that is very kidney friendly and can be a great addition. I think that's three there. Um, there's nothing better than a bell pepper for me personally because they're quick, convenient. They hold up in the fridge. You can chop them the night before. You can bring them in lunches, which are really, really helpful. And as well as snap peas can be a great snack that's quick on the go, some healthy protein that is a little bit different than our general vegetables that people name.
I love those. Those are now I feel like I want to go to the farmer's market and get to some shopping. That's awesome. We talked a little bit about like the some like the fish oil and things like that. Are there any other vitamins or supplements that you would recommend taking?
Yeah, so I always recommend not taking a supplement unless you know your why. Meaning, if you know you're deficient in something, then that's a good idea to take. So many times people with kidney issues get their vitamin D drawn, and the majority of us are vitamin D deficient. That's a great option. If you have gut issues, a probiotic might be something that's warranted to kind of help with that. And you want to make sure that the probiotic that you're looking at has at least five different strains, that you're not getting just one, a lot of one, because we need a diversity. Ultimately, with probiotics, we know gut health is important, but we don't know exactly how many of what specific is best for any one person. So we want a diversity there.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good to know. And then here's another question. Can I eat one Brazil nut?
I don't know you, but I'm going to say unsalted, it's probably all right.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
All right. And then when you're vetting different supplements, what do you look at?
that's a wonderful question. So, especially in the United States, supplements are not regulated. It's important to make sure you're choosing a third party tested supplement. This does not mean you have to buy the most expensive supplement on the market. In fact, many supplements are third party tested, that are inexpensive and you can find at any local grocery store, Target, Walmart, Walgreens, pharmacy, things like that. Um, but you want to look, there are a few testing agencies, so you want to look on the label and around it to see if it says third party tested. There are a few also symbols that are you can maybe look for too, but there's not just like one group that does all of the testing. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Are there certain like brands that you tend toward that you would be comfortable sharing, and it's totally fine if not?
I don't, there are some brands that I use with my patients, but I really like to take cost into consideration, number of pills somebody takes.
Hmm.
So it becomes very
Okay.
personalized ultimately on what is right versus like, this is a good brand, just follow this one.
That's a good way to look at it, just really thinking about how it can fit into your lifestyle as
Yeah.
well. I think this will be our last question because we are at the top of the hour. Are there any gluten foods that must be avoided?
Um, well, so gluten, we think of gluten primarily in like whole wheat and breads and things like that. But it's really something to take into consideration and think about is hidden sources of gluten. So things like soy sauce have gluten in them. A lot of soups that can be cream based or not cream based might be thickened with a roux that is flour based, and dressings and barbecue sauces and things like that. Thankfully, now gluten-free has become fairly mainstream that it used to be you had to um, spend a lot of money and make sure that it was, gluten-free. Now there are many, many products that are either naturally gluten-free or are gluten-free that are just the same cost as the non-gluten-free version. And I would say when looking at gluten-free, look at naturally gluten-free
Okay.
Meaning if you go into the gluten-free section of the grocery store, yes, it'll be gluten free, but it might be chock full of preservatives and salt and things. Like it's okay to get a rice cracker that's not in that fancy section, but is also gluten free. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good tip. I didn't even think about like the naturally gluten-free versus
Yeah.
like remove. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. That was so informative and so helpful. And I'm really excited for next month having recipes and different things we can kind of build off of this foundation that you've given us. And so to everyone out there, we'll send a follow-up with the email recording so you can refer back to all of these wonderful tips that we had and information about the next webinar is coming up, as well as an IgAN study that will actually be launching in March. So stay tuned for that email. And thank you again, Lauren, for your
Yeah.
time.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Folia, for having me. It was great.
Awesome.
Have a
Have a
good
great
one.
day, everyone.